So, welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. Today, I have a returning guest to the show, and I have Marcelle Rose, who has been on the podcast, we think, probably 3 or 4 times. So, well, it's really good to have you here, Marcelle, and we'll go back and I'll
Thank you.
make sure I link the other episodes. So, just to tell you a bit about Marcelle, Marcelle is a BANT and CNHC registered nutritionist, specialising in eating disorders and author of the best-selling book, The Binge Freedom Method. She empowers women to overcome binge eating, bulimia, and restrictive eating behaviours, enabling them to reclaim their lives through a unique synergy of nutritional therapy, eating psychology, and mindset coaching. So Marcelle works with clients across the UK and internationally, and also supports women through her free Facebook community, the Food Freedom Collective. In addition to her client work, she trains other professionals in this field and delivers talks and workshops to students, teachers, and parents in schools. So today, Marcelle is going to talk all about eating disorders and disordered eating in midlife. We're going to talk about perimenopause, GLP-1 medication and its impact on body image and eating, and the potential for the misuse or overuse of this, which I think many people are struggling with, and also specific nutritional advice for this midlife phase. So much great wisdom coming up. It's going to be a great episode. Let's get to it. Welcome back, Marcelle, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me back. It's good to be here again.
Yeah, it's so good to see you. And I think it's probably been a couple of years, hasn't it? Perhaps.
Yeah, been a while.
So, Marcel, just tell us a little bit about your book before we launch right into the episode. So, just mention that to the listeners, and just say a bit more about it, please.
Yeah, so it's called the Binge Freedom Method, and it's essentially for helping people struggle with binge eating, and they might also um, perhaps label themselves an emotional eater. And it's really taken them through 4 pillars, 4 of my essential pillars that I work through when I work with clients. So it's the nourish, balance, think, and feel. So we're really working on sort of nutritionally, how can we help reduce those cravings from a sort of biological point of view, but also working on understanding what's going on in terms of the balance of your biology and how you can support that, but also how thoughts and emotions impact everything, and how you can work through different strategies for working through that. So it's kind of a very holistic approach.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Well, thank you for talking through that. And I think it sounds like it's got the whole package, hasn't it? It's not just the nutrition, it's also all the mindset and the emotions and the self-care and all of that good stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I wanted to do, to sort of give everybody basically a framework that I kind of work, how I work through with my clients so that they can work through, but in very small action steps so it doesn't feel overwhelming. Because I know for a lot of people, you know, that I work with, that they have to take very, very small steps to work through it and notice and appreciate their wins and what they've achieved, and to be able to keep them motivated to move forward. So it's really about doing things step by step and going through a bit of a process with it, rather than feeling like I've got to change all these things all at once.
Yeah, no, sounds fantastic. I know I always say to my clients, the underwhelming steps are the ones that really count, aren't they? The things that
Yeah.
feel sometimes that they're so tiny.
Yeah, yeah. And I
Um,
think sometimes people think, oh, well, I haven't really done anything. And then we always have to allow that reflection and actually look at what they've actually achieved. And when they reflect back on what they have achieved, it can be so empowering and really motivating, and really people realize, oh well, no, I actually really have been moving forward.
yeah, so true. And Marcel, remind people as well the name of the book and the best place to buy it. Where can people access it?
So it's called the Binge Freedom Method, and it's basically available on Amazon and most other online bookstores. So Waterstones, and in the US, and internationally, you can get hold of it.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Yeah, so do go and check it out, listeners. And Marcel, can I just ask you a personal question? Actually, your hair is looking fabulous. So for anyone on YouTube, you can see. For anyone
Oh,
listening,
thank
Marcel's hair is looking very long and luscious. So
you.
any secrets for us?
Um, no, I think I've just given it a wash. No, um, I'd like to say I try and just have a varied diet. I don't know if that helps. Yeah, but thank you.
Okay, so we're going to talk about eating disorders, disordered eating in midlife.
Yes.
So first of all, Marcel, why do you think midlife is a bit of a susceptible phase for people struggling with food again?
Yeah, I think, and this is something that I know we often talk about the fact that eating disorders doesn't just happen in, young women or young adolescent girls, and that it can happen to anyone and then any gender, any background, um, and across the ages. But what we do see is, and especially sort of, when you look at the emerging evidence, that there is this spike as women go through their sort of midlife period, which coincides with the perimenopause. And so what we're seeing is that there's actually looking at the psychosocial factors. So that means we're looking at things like the biological factors, the psychological factors, and the social factors that are all kind of create this perfect storm almost. Um, as we see, and we do obviously we see young girls going through adolescence when we see kind of a spike in eating disorders, but at the same time we're seeing this spike during midlife. And talking about some of the biological factors, if you think about what's happening to female hormones, we see estrogen start to kind of roller coaster in perimenopause before it actually starts to really decline. So we've got this really high spikes of estrogen followed by these big drops that feels very unstable. We've got progesterone gradually decreasing, and that can bring about a number of different effects that, in fact, um, impact biologically, but also psychologically. So we've got things like appetite and cravings being impacted by that, but we've also got things like as many women experience, not all that go through perimenopause, but many women experience a lot of different symptoms, including sleep disturbance, for example. And we know that when there's a lack of good quality sleep, that impacts craving and appetite the next day. We know that that impacts our resilience to deal with stress and overwhelm. But then also we've got things like heightened anxiety, low mood, feelings of overwhelm and general distress, cognitive, problems and brain fog and all of that sort of colliding to create real, feelings of feeling out of control. I think a lot of women, I don't know if you've noticed this, but certainly a lot of the clients that I work with, and a lot of them are in that sort of midlife kind of age bracket, um, really feeling very overwhelmed with life and out of control. Um, and that's kind of one element of it. At the same time, we see the metabolic changes going on in the body. So we see our metabolic rate reduced by around 15% in women at this age. So we start to see changes in body shape and especially, around the center. So then we're getting a lot of more body image distress from people. And, another reason why women feel like, well, I've always eaten this way and I've always exercised this way, but why can't I control my body? And that feeling of being out of control again. So hence the idea, well, I need to really do something about it and, start on that sort of real strict dieting, perhaps, or just feeling out of control and going into sort of emotional binge eating kind of behaviours because everything feels so so difficult to manage, and that's kind of a coping mechanism.
Sure. Now, I think just hearing you saying it all out loud, obviously, like being a female woman myself in midlife and working with so many clients in this, going through this phase, but I think just hearing you saying it out loud, I just feel like it just bringing even more clarity to just what a difficult phase it is, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And I
Um,
know that not everybody obviously experiences all of those things, but there's and sometimes I think for women we don't actually realize some of the symptoms we're getting because there's so many symptoms in perimenopause that we might experience that aren't necessarily kind of named or well known as those symptoms. We just accept it's just, or maybe that we're getting older and we're experiencing. So probably half the time, I think a lot of women don't even realize that those are symptoms of perimenopause as well. Um, and we kind of have always just been told to get on with it. I know, luckily, lately, with the campaigns going on around women's health, there's more information out there, but still, I think there's a lot of work to do around that.
Yeah, no, I so agree. There's a lot of work. So I think there has been a much more awareness, hasn't there? And people talking all over social media so much more about menopause. But I think it's still not taken as seriously as perhaps like puberty, adolescence. Like we would really see that with food and body issues as a difficult time, wouldn't we? It's almost like a given in a way that that is a going to
Yeah,
happen almost. But I don't think we have given it the same sort of focus and level of kind of, yeah, sincerity,
no,
have we? With,
no.
yeah, and it needs
And
to
then,
have that.
yeah, and I think there's other things as well, of course, that might not be they sort of coincide with perimenopause, just being in midlife. Often there are, you're managing older kids, maybe leaving home, managing elderly parents, being in that sort of sandwich kind of generation of that, of what's going on there. And also it's the highest time between, I think it's between 40 and 44 years of age, of a woman's age, is the highest divorce rate. So we see separation happening with a lot of people at that age as well. So there's all these kind of social things, plus the pressure generally to, and I think it's all worse than ever now to look a certain way. This whole sort of anti-aging discussion and having to be, I know we'll get onto that, but the whole kind of having to look a certain way and body ideal getting, it's almost like it's taken a decade step back from the progress that has been made around body image. So there's a lot, I think, for women of this age group to particularly deal with.
Yeah, no, so true, isn't it? I think you're just really highlighting like the nutritional changes, the body changes, the anxiety, the symptoms of perimenopause, the hormones, the life changes, the possible higher risk of divorce and looking after children. It's everything, isn't it? It's a real cocktail. And of course, when life feels overwhelming and a bit out of control, and maybe as well we're seeing a change in our body, it can be very seductive, can't it, to be drawn back to old ways of coping maybe, or to
Yeah,
focus on something that we can control. And that often is one of the few things, isn't it, focusing on our food, focusing on our body. So what sort of eating disorders? I know you talked a bit about some, for some people it might be more restrictive eating or over exercising, emotional eating, binge eating, but can you say a bit more about the types of eating disorder and disordered eating presentations that you're mainly seeing in your clinic?
yeah. So I think, in my clinic, I would say that I'm seeing within that age group, it's definitely more people with bulimia, but especially with binge eating disorder. And I think the research says that anorexia tends to be less common over sort of the age around 26, but bulimia is still quite common up to kind of late 40s. But binge eating disorder can, you know, go on. We see that, maybe that's because anorexia often, if it's not addressed, has morphed into a different presentation, a different eating disorder. And I don't know if that's something that you see historically, that people's eating disorders might morph from anorexia to eventually binge eating disorder.
Yeah, and I think absolutely. I think there's often a sort of movement, isn't there, where across the eating disorders and diagnosis, yeah, can change at different phases of life. And I sort of think sometimes as well, I don't know if you find this, but some of my clients as well, perhaps when they were younger, they were sort of dieting more and in that very restrictive phase, and then it morphs more into maybe clean eating, perfect eating
Yeah.
with binge eating in the background because it's just not sustainable to eat in that
Yeah.
super clean way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially also in this age as well, where there is more information about perimenopause in general, this idea that, you've got to eat a certain way, perhaps that's also, prevalent among these women where, I need to be eating, cleanly, and I need to be restricting this, and I need to be, that's another kind of entry point as well for that kind of behavior, I suppose, because they're feeling like, I need to do my best to kind of deal and manage with these symptoms.
Yeah, no, so true. And I think sometimes something that really infuriates me a lot as well is I think that so much of the mainstream information out there still, if you listen to any of the mainstream podcasts or, which are very good in lots of ways, but if you get someone on there talking about nutrition, it's still very rare to talk about relationship with food and to talk about the more nuanced and psychological side of it.
Yeah.
You hear about how amazing this intermittent fasting regime is going and all the wonderful benefits, but you don't
Mm,
hear about the darker side, which you and I know it absolutely exists because we see people in the
yes.
therapy room all the time, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's so true. And it is really frustrating because it becomes so kind of black and white, doesn't it? With when you see things online and it's like, yes, this is what every woman should be doing. We should be intermittent fasting or, doing your keto or whatever. And actually, yeah, and you and I both see that fallout from that, where women have gone perhaps from one diet to the next diet. Most people who I speak to when they, talk to me before they start working with me, they might, they'll say, I have literally tried every single diet under the sun, you know, um, and they could name hundreds that they've tried. And sadly, it's led them to this situation where it's really impacting their life in a very negative way.
Yeah, no, very true. So, Marcel, the GLP-1s, obviously
Mm,
a big topic at the moment and probably really important to say as well. I think for some people, they are a really valuable tool, can be very helpful. For some people, they do seem to be a bit of a food reset and perhaps with some lifestyle changes, really support people to get on a different track, improve sort of diabetes management, all kinds of things. But I guess what you and I are seeing quite a lot of is the darker side of that. And it's not always a smooth
yeah,
journey for everyone. And I wonder what your thoughts are around these increased pressures that we are seeing because of everyone is getting thinner, aren't they? And a lot of people in the public eye. And I think it does feel like a lot of pressure.
yeah. I mean, I definitely feel like, as I said before, that the kind of shift back to almost it feels almost like back to the 90s with that pressure, and yeah, I completely agree with you that for some people it is a useful tool, but I think unfortunately, and I completely get the seductiveness of it, but for some people who might not meet the criteria of it, who are, obviously a lot of people are buying it privately, they're not necessarily getting properly screened, and the problem is that it can lead to many issues, and not least the fact that there isn't really any recommended kind of time when people should actually stop. So if you're not being monitored and you haven't been screened, you've not been monitored, and you're not getting support around it, um, there's no, for some people, it will be quite almost addictive to keep using it beyond what is considered healthy, you know. So we have that going on, but we also have generally many people the risk of nutritional deficiencies. We've got, you know, all sorts of, particularly for nutrients like vitamin A, D, E, K, B vitamins, vitamin C, that, you know, those are common deficiencies you begin to see in clients. It's very easy because they work by suppressing the appetite. Um, and if you have an unhappy relationship with food and your idea is, well, I just, you know, can hold off eating as long as possible, it's very easy to slip into that, well, I'm not really hungry, so why do I need to eat? And actually, if you're not putting in the right nutrients in terms of the right foods, putting in foods to get those nutrients, then you can end up with some serious problems. And of course, it, you know, it really impacts your hunger so that you're losing those hunger signals. And I know a lot of people talk about the food noise, and that's the kind of, you know, the thing that is in the media, and it's all about food noise. But actually, I see food noise quite differently. I get that for some people who they have those urges and binge urges and cravings, and it's so impossible to manage. But I'm sure you work the same way. But you know, I'm really about, okay, can we identify our appetite and hunger? Can we see where you are, and before you get overly hungry or overly full, can we bring it back to reconnecting with the body? And unfortunately, what these drugs do is, yes, they take away the food noise, but they're basically taking away that connection with your body. So you're completely disconnected, as you are with diets when you're listening to kind of external voices around what you should be eating. You're disconnecting from yourself and listening to your body, which kind of is not necessarily going to help you in the long run. It's not dealing with the root cause of things.
Yeah, no, it's so true, isn't it? Because I think there can be often be perhaps a bit of a honeymoon period, can't there? Because I think if you have
Yeah,
struggled with eating and all these issues, and then you take a GLP-1, it can probably just feel like absolute relief and
yeah.
peace, can't it? To almost like have all of that food noise,
Mm,
aka hunger or whatever, taken away. And you can really see why that would be appealing if you've got a difficult relationship with food. But I think you're
yeah.
so right about losing the connection with the body. And I'm finding in my therapy room that I'm working with people sometimes, even with anorexia, who've got hold of
Mm,
the drugs.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
you know, again, I've found it almost like this kind of golden magic pill, almost, you know, thing to start with. But then, of course, you start to get more of the side effects, maybe, which are not quite so appealing, or it becomes financially not
Mm,
sustainable. And then you come off it. And then for some
mm,
people, again, it's slightly different for everyone. I think it's really important to say, but for some people, then that, you know, that food noise, that kind of hunger that's just been turned off, it comes back,
mm.
doesn't it? Understandably, like with a vengeance, really. And then
Yes, absolutely.
that can be really overwhelming, can't it? And I'm
Yeah,
finding with some of my clients as well that then they're really vulnerable to, you know, maybe if they've got used to being in a much smaller body, which is not really sustainable without the drugs, then
yes,
they've started purging or over exercising or doing other things that they weren't doing before,
yes.
you know.
It's
um
there. There's definitely that. Because it doesn't actually deal with the body image distress, you know, it doesn't deal with the root of that. I mean, I get that it completely alleviates that feeling, and it probably gives a certain sense of freedom at that time. But as you say, many people can't continue with it long term, and rebound weight gain is very common with many people. Not everyone, but many people do experience that. And if you haven't dealt with the body image issues, the underlying body image issues, it's almost making it worse because, of course, then as well, when people are losing this weight on the drug and they're getting all these compliments, you look amazing, you know, everyone's, you know, it's boosting their sort of dopamine, and it's kind of giving them that sort of what they think is a self-esteem boost because they're still very much connected to their self-worth being linked to body size. And, I completely understand in the environment that we live in why, because, it's everywhere and that's what this sort of diet culture is ramming down our throats. But then, of course, when they regain the weight, when they come off the medication, that all of that is still there, and then they're thinking, well, what will people think of me now? And and it's almost even worse for them because they've gone through this. It's like sort of the old way of the weight cycling through dieting in a way. That whole, oh, I feel amazing, but now I've regained the weight, so what will people say? What were people thinking about me now? Because they all thought I looked amazing then, but now you know they're not thinking that. And then, and it's a whole nother thing, I suppose, if you with anorexia as well.
It's so, so challenging, isn't it? Because I guess so important with all of this to be so compassionate and understanding to people, really, because
Mm,
it's so seductive, isn't it? In a
yeah,
world that we live in, which validates us, and perhaps particularly as women as well, but so validated. I sort of think about people in the media like, good old Demi Moore is in her 60s, isn't she? And she looks about 30 and it's,
yeah,
there's, I guess we are inundated all the time, aren't we, with all these images and how we're supposed to look. And
mm,
yeah, it's really hard not to be influenced by those messages. And I think like what you were talking about, the very real experience that someone has of a lot of validation for weight loss, it just
mm,
reinforces, doesn't it, this whole cycle. Because I find with so many of my clients, actually, if anyone that's had either a lot of negative or a lot of positive comments about their body in their life,
yeah,
it's so unhelpful, isn't it? I always think
yeah,
body neutrality is the way forward, really. Because I even think about, I don't know if you
yes,
find this as well, but some of my really objectively, very like beautiful clients are often some of the most insecure because of people have
yes,
told them their whole lives you're so attractive, you're so beautiful. And it's like, oh my God, pressure. I've got to like
yes,
maintain this. I've got to look really young. And it's
yeah,
difficult, isn't it? That validation is it's so seductive, but actually it's it's like I was saying to my clients, like a bucket with a hole in the bottom.
yeah,
You can't really ever get enough feedback and reassurance to feel secure. You kind of need to keep filling it up, don't you? And that's almost
yeah,
like an endless job.
yes, yeah, absolutely. And it just doesn't, it's not going to deal with that underlying, you know, low self-worth. And actually, it's so important to build it up in different ways that aren't connected to appearance. But yeah, body neutrality, just I have a body. Isn't my body brilliant what it does to me? Um, what it does for me, what it keeps doing for me, what it allows me to do. It's just unfortunately it's just moved so far away from that now in the media, and I think we have to just keep shouting about it and saying otherwise. And hopefully, I mean, there are people trying to give out a different message. But I think you can just get so trapped, can't you, in your social media algorithms that you might not even ever see that. And you're just hearing that sort of echo chamber of and seeing what that sort of very skinny body ideal that we think that we should all feel like we have to achieve, which is obviously unrealistic for most people anyway.
Yeah, it is unrealistic, isn't it? And I guess there's
Yeah,
something about, isn't there? Because I think in a way everyone has the freedom to choose, don't they, what they want to do with their body. And, sometimes for some
yeah,
people it might be taking a GLP-1, but I guess it's
yeah,
about really just people being really informed and
yeah,
having psychological support, behavioral support, and realistic expectations, I guess, about what
yeah.
to
Yeah,
expect.
absolutely. I mean, I do have clients that have, are on medication, and I, work through with them in a way that helps to at the same time while they're on this. deal with the underlying things going on as much as we can, and work through nutritionally so that at least their plan is not to be on it forever, and to be able to, gradually um, be able to come out in the world and not have to deal with all that, not know how to deal with the kind of food noise if it returns, and the cravings, and and be able to work through their body image issues. But certainly, I think people seem to, from what I'm seeing, people seem to do better if they are getting that wraparound support somehow, however they're getting it, while they're on it, rather than not.
Yeah, no, so it's a good message, isn't it, really? Because I think, yeah, it's like no shame in a way for taking the GLP-1s, and just to really think about it quite critically, and get as
Yeah,
much of a team of support as you can. I know that's not always on offer, is it? But I think it's just really acknowledging that that is
no,
the best model, isn't it, really? Um,
yeah, absolutely.
so Marcel,
Yeah,
tell us a
as
bit
you
about,
say, it can
go
be.
on.
Yeah, I was going to say, as you say, it can be a tool for some people, uh, if they're meeting the right criteria, I think. But it can be a dangerous thing for somebody with an eating disorder without it going unchecked.
Yes, absolutely. So, can you talk a bit about nutritional interventions? And, if you're in midlife and you are dealing with a lot of these things, what can people do to really self-care and look after themselves and support their physical and mental health?
Yeah, so I think without becoming overly obsessive with it, it's really about the balance, which doesn't sound very sexy because it doesn't get the hits on social media, and it doesn't get the clickbait on from newspapers. But it is about thinking, okay, eating regularly. It's back to that: eat your regular meals. Make sure your body is, give your body the nutrition in line with your circadian rhythm, because each cell in your body works to a circadian clock. And if you are doing that, if you're eating your regular meals, your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you're kind of supporting that whole thing. So you're supporting your body to do and work at its best. Um, think about adding in, not stripping out. So I'm very much about, it's not about eliminating foods. Let's see what we can add in, the variety of the food. Yes, make sure you've got protein in your diet. I know protein had its kind of thing. Now fiber's having its thing on social media. And obviously we've known for a very long time that fiber's really important for general well-being. It's important for your digestive system, for kind of a detoxification, because you're basically passing your stools, and you're helping that with hormone balance as well. So if you're including a variety of different foods, and when I say fiber, that we're talking about a variety of different coloured fruits and vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, lentils, beans, chickpeas, that kind of thing. As much variety as you can, because then you're giving your gut microbiome as much food, and your gut microbiome is basically your ecosystem in your gut. So you want that to ideally be as balanced as possible, so that you've got all these different species in your gut, as you would if you imagine a garden of flowers and you want all these different species to live in this garden. Same way with your gut. So um, you want to try and kind of feed your gut with as much variety as you can, and actually just thinking about all the colors and textures and foods like that. So if you think about food in a different way, rather than I must be eating X, Y, and Z, and I must not eat X, Y, and Z. It's, how can I create lovely, colourful, tasty, crunchy meals, including, um, all different, as I said, textures, but also all different flavours. So how can I include herbs and spices and things in my meals? All of that counts. So it's really thinking a little bit differently about that, making sure you are eating enough protein without becoming overly obsessed with protein, but that can help you maintain your muscle. At the same time, doing for perimenopausal women, it's really important to do some weight resistant exercise. without, becoming compulsively, compulsive around exercise, but do some kind of weight resistance, because that helps maintain your muscle mass and your metabolic rate. So those things are really important. I would just say also eating, it's important to also include your natural fats in the diet as well. So your things like your nuts and seeds that contain avocado, olive oil, oily fish, that kind of thing. So it's really just sort of adding in a very balanced way rather than becoming overly obsessive. I know there's a lot of conversation around UPFs at the moment also, and I think there needs to be a bit more nuance about that. I think there's a lot of fear mongering as well, and it's not helpful to stress around the foods that you shouldn't be eating. And I say shouldn't with the kind of inverted commas, because actually we can do more damage, I think, sometimes being stressed about food. The way you think about food, we've seen in studies, actually impacts cortisol levels and stress levels. And that can have more of a detrimental effect, especially if you're in perimenopause and you're dealing with all this other stuff, um, on your body than actually eating the food in the first place. So it's really about thinking, okay, what can I add into my diet and get enjoyment from food and feel satisfied from food.
And I love that. It's really is about balance, isn't it? And like you said, it's the doesn't sound very sexy for people, but
Mm,
I guess what comes across when you were talking then is it's a really about enjoying food and self-care and looking after yourself, isn't it? And having some
yeah.
perhaps some structure and a bit of a scaffolding of, like regular eating and things like that. But
Mm,
it's not about being super rigid and controlling. And like I think that there's
no.
quite a subtle difference, isn't there, between
Yeah.
like having that really lovely scaffolding of self-care and pleasure and enjoyment around food, where you really are taking very good care of yourself. Like that's a very different energy, isn't it? From like, oh, I've got to have my so many calories and this amount of
Yeah.
protein and walk these steps and
Yeah.
it's the rigidity, isn't it, and the anxiety, which is often
Yeah.
really problematic, but and becoming obsessed about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's that flexibility within the scaffold, as you say, is just so important. And because knowing that if you've eaten something that hasn't quite lived up to your expectation, that's okay. It's not going to change anything. It's looking at the bigger picture rather than homing in on a particular food or meal or even a day. I know that that's sort of all or nothing thinking comes up with all my clients pretty much, a lot, and it's a big thing we have to work on. Is that it's okay, it's fine. Um, and I think when I see real progress in clients, it's when they're able to say, well, actually, I realized that I didn't want X, Y, and Z, whereas in before it would be, you must not have this, that kind of argument with yourself. You must not eat this food. But it's when they come to the point of, well, I had it, I ate that thing when I wanted to, but actually today I realized I didn't even feel like that. I felt like this, or I felt like that, and it wasn't coming from a place of restriction. It was very much listening to the body and what they felt like, and that's when I think it's amazing when you see that, because that's real progress.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it just makes me think that one's relationship with food really mirrors your relationship with life, doesn't it? And I
Yeah,
think, you know, not just with food, but with everything, we want to be really self-caring and listening to the body and having rest and peace and
mm,
fulfillment and 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 that's what we want with food, isn't it? And then you can
yeah,
when you're coming at it from that place as well, it's not a like, oh my God, I've got to like force this. It's more you're in tune with your body and then you can make choices that feel intentional and wise and honoring what you really want in that moment. And sometimes it is the piece of cake and sometimes it is the salad and many
yeah,
times it's many things in between.
yes, exactly. It is about that intentional, kind of very mindful sort of approach, which is so different from that restrictive, very rigid approach. And yeah, and I know from clients, they just say it is so freeing to realize that when they get to that point. It's so wonderful to witness a client see that, to transform in that way. Um, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, that's why we do what we do, hey?
Yeah, exactly.
So, Marcel, where can people find you if they want to work with you, find out more about what you do, etc.?
So thank you. So I'm at Marcelle Rose Nutrition on Instagram and Facebook. I'm Marcelle Rose Nutrition, and my website's marcelrosenutrition.co.uk. So pretty much, yeah, all of those places. Um, yeah, I think come and join me in the Food Freedom Collective as well. That's a Facebook group where I'm posting weekly sort of bite-sized videos and weekly support and answering questions and things as well. But yeah, come and join me there and on Instagram.
Okay, well, wonderful. Well, thank you, Marcel. As usual, I have really enjoyed our conversation. I think you always have a wonderful approach and so much wisdom to share, which I know will really resonate so much with the listeners. So thank you so much for being here on the podcast. And yeah, I shall look forward to you kind of coming back again at another time soon.
Thanks, Harriet.